This week could be one we look back on and think this is where this Chelsea squad had their coming of age. But was there enough in there to suggest that Chelsea could be title challengers this season?
Okay, let's just get straight into it because this game, there is so much to unpack in that Chelsea versus Arsenal game. The first thing that I just want to touch on is actually what happened in the game and the mentality of Chelsea within the game. Now, I think a lot of key talking points, of course, you've got the Caicedo sending off. I think Reece was absolutely magnificent. I think everybody played their part in this game. Now, the big talking point being Caicedo's red card. Firstly, I want to say, I do obviously think it is a red. I think a lot of people will see that challenge and say, yeah, that's dangerous and it is excessive force. But one thing I will say about Caicedo, and it's something I've sort of been mulling over and thinking about, is I think that when you've got players like Caicedo and somewhat the same with Cucurella, is players that are so intense off the ball, and that's what makes them special. I do think that it's a fine line to be trod where Caicedo, it's part and parcel of how he plays. There will be challenges like that sort of are on the edge, and he's probably gotten away with one or two in his Chelsea career so far. He didn't get away with one yesterday, even though, as Maresca pointed out, the Bentancur one was just as bad. But I don't want Caicedo to stop using that aggression because it is what makes him so special off the ball. A lot of people are thinking about sort of saying that he needs to rein that in. But I do think that if you make him rein that in, that sort of takes away part of what makes Caicedo Caicedo. So I just wanted to sort of put that one out there to begin with. And of course, it's still a disappointing one. And Caicedo is going to be disappointed in himself, I'm sure. Same with the Chelsea players behind closed doors. They're probably thinking that we could have quite easily got a win from this game had that not happened. But I think we should get straight into this because, like I said, there was just so much in this game that I think that Chelsea got spot on from the starting sort of tactics and the idea for the first sort of 35 minutes before Caicedo was sent off. I think the press was unbelievable. Now, largely the pressing idea from Chelsea was to go man for man in a similar way that we did against Barcelona, and we called this in the preview. Esteval's jumps on this side of the pitch, same with Gusto, would be key to allowing Chelsea to transition from almost this -1 front press, because as you can see here, Chelsea got the -1 here, but they have got the +1 here with Caicedo back here and Eze there as well. You've got a 5v4 in that first line, or that last line for Chelsea. Now, the difference between going between the two was, of course, the same sort of jumps where Esteval goes on to Hincapié. You've got man for man in the middle of the park, Caicedo on Eze, Fernandes on Zubimendi, and James on Declan Rice, which was a brilliant battle. And then you've got Gusto, who would jump all the way up onto Calafiori, Fofana over onto Martinelli, and again, it would sort of become that sort of back three with everybody having their man across the front line. And then Caicedo has got Eze where he can follow him in, or he can drop off. Now, a key part of this, I think, was the passing of players. Now, let's get this straight. Chelsea's press and the intensity of it, and again, this is what led to Caicedo being sent off, because each player was meeting their duel really, really nicely, forcing Arsenal into a few passing errors, and keeping it tough for Arsenal to play out. And if they were going to play out, then it was going to be with mistakes. However, when this sort of happened, it wasn't so perfect that Chelsea were able to completely cut off Arsenal from sort of finding their spare man, especially when these jumps were taking place on that right-hand side of the pitch. And what it sometimes led to was, say, Calafiori getting in behind and being able to drive into this space. And I think that it was the intensity that allowed Chelsea to sort of stifle Arsenal even in those moments. And it led to what was, for me, one of our best out of possession performances of the season, because there were points where we were willing to not jump and we would keep that +1 in this sense. And Esteval would sort of track back into here. Calafiori, like I say, maybe he'd take that touch forward and he'd be the one sort of attacking into the center of that block. But you had the likes of James, Fernandes, Caicedo all working back. And that collective sort of unity of the team and the togetherness really allowed Chelsea to sort of rebuild into that block before then sprouting into their man-for-man actions. And I thought that was really, really strong from everybody involved. I think the plan was there. I think especially with Marino and Eze, there was a few times where Marino was looking to drop in, Eze was looking to go ahead. And I think what was clear is that instead of doing what I thought we might do and go extreme man for man, where Caicedo follows all the way, Chalobah follows all the way, and we end up with these moments where it looks like Caicedo's your nominal centre half, what we actually saw a little bit more of was the passing on of these players as they sort of cross paths. Caicedo and Chalobah being willing to switch men, and Caicedo then being the one to follow Marino into midfield and to sort of be on him. And then if Marino came back into the front line, he would follow. And I think those triggers to pass a man on were really quite good between a lot of the players, because again, Enzo would sometimes sort of jump out and he'd pass Zubimendi onto Pedro whilst Fernandes sort of made the press ahead. And those triggers all over the pitch, again, it comes to togetherness, because you have to be sure and you have that the player has taken on the responsibility before you make the jump. And it's something that Arsenal themselves are really, really good at. They sort of wait and they don't leave their secondary man, or they don't leave them in the cover shadow until they're sure that somebody else has picked them up before they then make the pressing action onto someone else. And I thought Chelsea did that really, really well within their shape against Arsenal in that first sort of half an hour before the red card. Now, if we just go on to a few of these, actually, I'll quickly touch on the on-ball stuff, because I thought that some of the on-ball stuff was really, really clever. Now, the big one being the fact that Rice was basically in a role where he had to watch both of these players. He had to split the two of them, because you had someone like Eze who was watching Caicedo. Zubimendi was sticking to Enzo Fernandez. Fernandez was pulling him over here at times. Zubimendi was following. And of course, that was a big space in the middle of the park. Marino, a lot of the time on Chalobah, but he was basically, again, splitting the two centre halves. But as we expected, Chelsea did go into this sort of back four shape using Sanchez here. And then you had the two in midfield of James and Caicedo, Fernandes, and then Gusto sort of pushing up, because Fofana's taken up that role. Gusto's able to go in behind Martinelli and be a nuisance between, again, Declan Rice, Martinelli, and Calafiori. He's a ref, and even Hincapié. Nobody truly knows whose man that is unless Martinelli follows all the way, but that gives Chelsea so much control on this side of the pitch. So that's not something that Arsenal really wanted to do, because they want to have that pressure on the ball. Now, what's so clever in these moments as well was Reece dropping all the way to here, because as we've said, Rice had such a tough role in this game in terms of having to split the markers, like we've just said, here and here, that the further James sort of dropped in to almost, again, he's forming that back four. Fofana's over here, but Reece is now in at that right centre-back role, where he can get on the ball and he can start picking passes forward. But he's also, Rice has now got a huge sort of distance to jump. Gusto's the free man behind. If Rice goes all the way, Caicedo can get away from Eze on one occasion. Again, sometimes it's Eze sort of pushing in here and Rice is having to split James and Caicedo. There's so many different ways that Chelsea were able to sort of get that first, manipulate that first phase using James in a bit of a deeper position to then find the spare man between the lines. And something I loved, we're going to touch on it here, is especially in that first half, I think there was a clear emphasis from Enzo Maresca on drawing these Arsenal players forwards, here, and a little bit like against Manchester United. And Manchester United had some really good moments from this in their first game of the season of the Premier League this year. And I think that Maresca's drawn from this a bit, because then what he was looking to do is, once you've drawn that forward, is hit here and allow, and again, João Pedro did this brilliantly against two Arsenal defenders that aren't Gabriel and Saliba. So again, it's a point that you can try to sort of take advantage of. And then what you'd have is this net of runners, Enzo, Caicedo, James, Gusto, sometimes Cucurella would even come charging in from here. And then you've got Esteban, Neto, who are sort of stretching at the top end. And what it allowed for is Chelsea to win the ball in this big area and then kickstart attacks and almost have those sort of artificial transitions, but starting from that first phase of build-up and drawing it into here. So I thought that was a really good plan in the first 35 minutes to get that going. Again, we're talking about this man-for-man, sort of this is off the ball. You got all the midfielders going man-for-man here. And like I said, I think it was really, really well executed from Chelsea in that first opening 35 minutes. The other thing to touch on, Esteban's rest defense role, I thought was brilliant. Again, rest attack role, sorry. We spoke about this against Barcelona. I think because you have him, if we go back, because you have him here, if Calafiori does push on, and that's Gusto's man, and they've sort of shifted in this way, Martinelli's gone a little bit more central, Calafiori's here with Gusto. What it means is if you do regain the ball, Esteval has this much space out wide to be the one that creates from those attacks. And he had one or two chances, which he probably should have done better with, because here he's got Hincapié coming over because he has to come over and sort of put pressure on Esteval. And it was actually Declan Rice who had to do a really sort of ridiculously good job at getting back and recovering here to make sure Chelsea didn't concede, to make sure Arsenal didn't concede, from Pedro Neto and from Esteval finding Pedro Neto in the gap. So having Esteval as this rest attacker, something that I could think will happen with Cole Palmer as well when he's back in these big games, is really, really good in the sense of it allows your best attacker to be the one making those final decisions in the final third. On a better day, we probably benefit from that, and we come away from this game really speaking about that rest attack role with a bit more sort of substance to it and a bit more sort of something to put to it, as in a goal or an assist for Esteval. Here, of course, this is after the red card, but again, just wanted to point out the set piece brilliance. To do this with 10 men, a man down, and to still find that perfect ball. We've been doing this a lot this season where we overload that front post, and it's where the goal comes from. And it's a huge goal. Buzzing for Chalobah. I love the sort of the celebrations that came with it as well. I think that it just shows the unity of the team, which is an ongoing theme throughout this video. But I thought that that was brilliant. And then we go on to this sort of next phase of the game, because we spoke about the ideas of sort of winning those second balls, trying to overload them when we did sort of in possession in that first half when it was 11v11, and also the idea of using really that intensity within the man-to-man press and switching. But what impressed me even more was how we dealt with things at 10 men, because essentially a 4-4-1-1 at most points. You had the 4-4-1-1 here, those four, and then you got your one. Now, if we press on to here, what you often saw in these moments, and we can actually use it on the board here again, is we made the subs at half-time to go from, you took off Esteval and João Pedro. Now, Esteval was half-time, João Pedro was about 53 minutes once we'd scored the goal. The lap came on up front, Garnacho and Neto. Now, why is this so significant? I think it's because of the games that we've already lost this season, where we've gone down to 10 men, and Maresca himself has said that he's made some poor decisions. Now, like I said in those games, I don't think every decision he made in those games were poor. I think the main one that he struggled with was keeping outlets on the pitch to be a threat yourselves. Taking Neto off in both the United and the Brighton game, for me, were big mistakes. Keeping Neto on in this game, but also bringing on Garnacho, rather than taking off Esteval and going for, say, Tosin, to go really defensive, and then you only really have Neto as your sort of the guy to get you out on the break. Having Garnacho and Neto, who are both defensively, they work hard. They were acting as fullbacks at times, basically in a 6 across the back. At times it was a 6-2-1. But then they were able to be that sort of outlet off the ball and help Chelsea get forward. And then that's something Delap could do as well. A little bit more of a hold-up player in that sense, but also a bit more of a one-man band. And I thought that having all three of those on the break meant that Chelsea could remain a threat, whether that was within the 4-4-1 shape or within the 6-2-1 shape. And I think that we did really, really well to make those changes, but also to apply the optimum amount of pressure that we needed to make. And we're going to speak about why that was, because the decision, and again, this you can see here, you've got that pressure, you've got that ability to hit in transition. I think this was from a goal kick, not a goal kick, a set piece maybe, where Sanchez has claimed the ball and he's managed to get it out. João Pedro on the break, the lap on the break. You've got players joining in the attack as well. So you've got plenty of threat yourselves going the other way, and you wasn't limiting it to just being a game where we was only ever going to draw, which I loved. I think this one shows it. One of these ones shows it best, right? The idea was, and we'll show it on the tactics board first, was for Delap to split that top end of the pitch. Now, what Arsenal were really doing is they were still dropping one into the back line to make a 3. So instead of Delap going to really heavily press the ball, his job was just to stay in the middle and force it to one side or the other. Once it's forced to one side or the other, Delap's job is essentially done. He's then there to be an outlet, because what was allowed, and again, Neto was basically on Calafiori, Gusto would shuffle inside, Cucurella on Saka, Garnacho was following Timber, and then you have these two in the middle who they've got their men, but they're also willing to sort of help here. And how good we were defending compact was really, really good to see, because it's something we need to see a little bit more of in certain games. And I think this was a great example of it working really, really well, and everybody working for one another. And we talk about that togetherness again, because the spaces Chelsea were willing to give up, especially with these guys dropping off, were both these spaces here. And the idea of still being man to man was quite clear. Delap's man essentially at this point was, like I said, the guy to split the pitch. But at this point, again, you've got a 2v1 there, you've got Gusto with Martinelli, you've got Neto and Calafiori, you've got Garnacho and Timber. It allowed you to stay man for man behind the ball. So we were still playing a man-oriented defence, just far deeper, rather than doing it aggressively. And Delap's job was to keep it so that they could go to one side. So that meant that if then, let's change this arrow, Mosquera steps all the way forward into here, then maybe eventually somebody jumps out and it sort of shifts and Chalobah follows Marino and Eze sort of Delap comes in as well. But again, the idea was to actually allow those central defenders really to be the ones that find themselves in these advanced areas sort of here and here, and force them to be the ones that make the decisive action and keep everybody else man for man. We're not going to lose those central midfielders. We're going to have, again, everybody sort of onto a man, and you guys are going to make the decisive action, or it's not going to happen. And I think Chelsea did really, really well in that sense. Now, Saka did well for the goal, but again, like when they were going into these wide areas, the idea of keeping Garnacho on Timber, Cucurella on Saka, Fernandes would come over on Eze if he went over, and they were really keeping those 3v3s out wide, really, really tight together, and forcing Arsenal backwards rather than allowing them to sort of create those chances to get the ball in the box, which they limited them to. And then, of course, when they did, there was the mistake from Fofana, who was caught ball watching. But I thought Fofana throughout the whole game was actually brilliant. So it's a tough one to sort of really go into and like really sort of attack him for that one moment. Because like I said, I think the collective performance from everybody was just outstanding. And I think that there's so much praise for every single player on that pitch, whether it's the starting 11 and Maresca's game plan for the starting 11, like we touched on at the start of this video, but also how he adapted to 10 men, which is, again, a sign of growth from Maresca himself, who's struggled with a few games like that this season. The togetherness of the team, the leadership of the team, because you have players like Reece and Fernandes, especially, who just were absolutely gargantuan in that sort of middle of the park. Wes and Chalobah, again, I thought they were really sort of good at the back and leading by example in that sense. And you could see it from the goal and even a few tackles that Chalobah made, like sort of really bringing that energy to the game. You have your players like Gusto, Cucurella, Garnacho, Neto. They're workhorses. They were doing everything they could on the outside of the block to defend against Arsenal when they dragged them over to these wide areas. And there's just so many positives to come from this game. And it's actually a shame that we didn't come away with more, because I think that we deserved it. We was well worth the point, and I don't think anyone could have moaned if we came away with all three, even at 10 men, which is a huge positive coming away from this game. So I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I think in the next few days, we're going to have a few more sort of tactical videos. Somebody I'm going to go into a bit more of a deep dive on is Reece James, because I absolutely love his role. And I have loved his role pretty much the entire time under Maresca, because of how it's managed him and allowed him to be a big part of these games. And we've seen exactly why he's so important to keep for the big games in this exact game today. Or yesterday. I'm recording this on the Monday. So brilliant to see. Let me know all your questions. I'll try and get to them. But what a game. What a performance. And now the big test is if we are going to be in a title race, which is somewhat what this video is going to be titled on, because like I said, I think the leadership's there now. Not saying it's there in a sort of wholehearted sense, but I think we've shown the heights it can get to. And I've always said, I think that we're well set up for these big games. The big thing for me now is, can we now keep that momentum when Caicedo is probably going to be out? Reece James is probably going to be out. Caicedo is definitely out. Reece James is probably out. I think Maresca said he's not going to play a 90. Wes probably won't play. Can we make those changes now against Leeds on a Wednesday night, 8:15 kickoff, and can we keep momentum and get a win? Because that's what's important, is that we don't now down tools after playing a big week of football with Barcelona, Arsenal. That's the big test for us. So we're going to speak about all of this stuff in the coming days. Leave all your questions. Please show any support you can. This is the last month we've got to try and hit 10K, so all the support will really, really go a long way. Like, hype, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video.